Before I write the full story, let me confirm the names I'm creating are completely new and absent from your used names list. Here's the story. Before I tell you this, I want you to write in the comments what time it is where you are right now, and if you've ever had a moment where you smiled at someone while everything inside you was on fire. You'll understand exactly what I'm about to share. My son brought her home on a Sunday in October. I remember that specifically because the leaves had just started turning on the old oak in my backyard, the one his mother planted the year he was born, and I had just finished raking when I heard his car pull into the driveway. I set the rake against the fence, wiped my hands and my jeans, and walked around front. He was already out of the car, holding the passenger door open for her like he was afraid she might dissolve as she touched the handle herself. Her name was Serena. She was tall, the kind of tall that seems intentional, and she wore a cream-colored coat that probably cost more than my first car. She extended her hand when my son introduced us. Not a shake exactly, more like a presentation. And she smiled with every single one of her teeth. "I've heard so much about you," she said. "All good things, I hope," I said. She laughed like I'd said something genuinely clever. "My son's name is Joel. He's 34, works in commercial real estate, and has his mother's eyes and my stubbornness, which is a difficult combination. His mother passed 8 years ago. Breast cancer. 2 years from diagnosis to the end. And since then, it's been just the two of us, trying to figure out holidays and birthdays and all the spaces a person leaves behind when they go." Joel had dated here and there after college. Nothing serious. And I'd stopped asking about it because I could see it made him uncomfortable. So when he called me 3 weeks before that October Sunday and said, "Dad, I've been seeing someone. I want you to meet her," I felt something ease in my chest that I hadn't realized was tight. I want to be clear about that. I was rooting for this woman before I ever laid eyes on her. Serena came inside and complimented my kitchen and asked thoughtful questions about the photographs on the mantel. She knew the right things to say about his mother, not too much, not with false intimacy, just enough to seem considerate. She helped set the table without being asked. She ate everything on her plate and said my pot roast was the best she'd ever had, which I knew was an exaggeration, but it was a kind one. By the time we sat down with coffee, I thought, Joel found someone good. That thought lasted about 40 more minutes. We were still at the table. The plates were pushed back. The afternoon light had gone amber through the windows, and Joel was telling some story about a property deal that had nearly fallen apart, and Serena was listening with her chin in her hand, watching him the way people watch something they've already decided belongs to them. Then she set down her coffee cup, and she looked at me and she said, "We've actually been talking about the wedding." "We have," Joel said, and he smiled. But something in his voice was flat. I said congratulations, that I was thrilled, asked when they were thinking. "Next September," Serena said, "which doesn't give us a lot of time, honestly. The venues we want book 18 months out, minimum. The good photographers the same." She paused. "We've been looking at the Hartwell estate." I knew the Hartwell estate. Everyone in the county knows it. It's a restored antebellum property about 40 minutes north of the city. The kind of place that ends up on magazine covers and in the background of luxury car commercials. I'd been to a fundraiser there once, years ago, with Joel's mother. She had worn a green dress. "Beautiful place," I said. "It is," Serena said. "The full package, venue, catering, florals, the overnight accommodation for the wedding party comes to around $380,000. I waited for the rest of the sentence. There wasn't one. "That's quite a budget," I said carefully. "Weddings at that level usually are." She said it the way you'd explain something to a child. Not unkind, just patient. "And then there's the honeymoon. We're thinking Amalfi Coast, Santorini, maybe 10 to 12 days, which would be another 40 or 50,000, depending on what we do." I looked at Joel. He was looking at his coffee cup. "And the rings, the dress, the rehearsal dinner," she continued. "All in, we're probably looking at somewhere between $450,000 and $500,000. The room was very quiet. "That's a significant number," I said. "It is," she agreed. "And I know it's a lot to ask, but this is the most important day of our lives, and I think we both agree we only want to do this once." She smiled. "Joel said you'd been thinking about updating your portfolio?" Some of your commercial properties? I want to stop here for a moment, because I need you to understand what was happening in my body while my face stayed completely still. My jaw did not drop. My eyes did not go wide. I am 63 years old. I have negotiated real estate deals and sat across from difficult people and buried my wife, and I have learned, the way you only learn through loss, that the most important thing you can do in a moment of shock is nothing. So I picked up my coffee. I took a sip. I said, let me think about all of this. It's a lot to process. Serena nodded warmly. Of course, take all the time you need. Under the table, something pressed against the side of my foot. Joel's shoe. Deliberate, firm, twice. I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes on Serena, and I asked her about her own family, where they were based, whether they'd be contributing to the celebration. She said her parents were retired in Scottsdale, comfortable but not in a position to contribute significantly. She said it with a practiced sadness, the kind that's designed to close the conversation, not open it. After dessert, Serena excused herself to use the restroom. The moment I heard the door at the end of the hall click shut, Joel leaned forward and slid a folded piece of paper across the table. 4 words. Dad, she is dangerous. I looked up at him. His face was pale. I tucked the note into my shirt pocket. When Serena came back, I was clearing plates and humming to myself. I told them I had an early morning and walked them both to the door, and told Serena it had been a genuine pleasure, and that I looked forward to getting to know her better. She hugged me. She smelled like expensive perfume. I stood on the porch and watched the car back out of the driveway, and I stood there until the taillights disappeared around the curve of the road. And then I went inside and sat down at my kitchen table and unfolded that piece of paper and looked at those 4 words for a long time. He called me the next morning before 7. I could tell he'd been up most of the night. His voice had that texture, thin, overworked, that I recognized from when he was a teenager sitting outside his mother's hospital room pretending not to be scared. He said he didn't know how to start. I told him to start wherever it felt right, and I had nowhere to be, and I was listening. What he told me over the next hour and a half changed the temperature of everything. He had met Serena 14 months earlier at a fundraiser for a children's hospital downtown. She had been charming and quick, and she made him feel, he said, like the only person in a crowded room. They started dating in January. By March, she had moved into his apartment. Her lease, she said, was up, and her next place wasn't ready yet. Just a few weeks. The few weeks became permanent. In April, her car needed repairs. The transmission, she said, had gone completely. The estimate was $4,200. She was embarrassed to ask, but could he help just this once? He helped. In June, there was a situation with her previous landlord. Some dispute over a security deposit that had escalated into a small claims issue. She needed to cover a legal retainer. $3,500, she said. She would pay him back from her settlement. She hadn't paid him back. In July, a close friend of hers was launching a boutique skincare line and needed a small investor to secure production for the first run. $12,000. A sure thing, Serena said. Joel never heard anything more about the skincare line. In August, there was a family emergency in Scottsdale. Her father had a health scare, she said, and she needed to fly out immediately and cover some medical costs while the insurance sorted itself out. $8,000. By the time October came, by the time she was sitting in my kitchen asking me to fund a $500,000 wedding, Joel had given her just under $30,000 in less than a year, and not 1 cent had been repaid. But you're still with her, I said, not as judgment, as a question. He was quiet for a moment. I love her, he said. And then he said, or I thought I did. I don't know what I think anymore. But she says if I end it, she'll tell people things about me. Claim things. She mentioned a lawyer friend. I set down my coffee. I asked him to give me 2 weeks. He asked what I was going to do. I told him I was going to think. What I actually did was call a friend of mine named Carol, We'd been in the same Rotary chapter for 15 years. He'd spent 30 of them as a fraud investigator for the State Insurance Commission before he retired. I asked Carol if he'd be willing to meet for lunch and take a look at a situation I was dealing with. Carol met me at the diner on Thursday. I walked him through everything. He listened without interrupting, which is rare and valuable in a person. When I finished, he said, "How much documentation does your son have?" I said some. Texts, bank records, some emails. Carol said documentation was everything and asked if Joel would be willing to collect it. Joel was willing. Over the next 10 days, Joel compiled everything. Screenshots of conversations in which Serena had requested money, bank transfer records, the texts about the skincare investment and the landlord dispute and the Scottsdale emergency. Carol helped me sort through it with someone he knew at the county DA's office. Not officially, not yet, but an informal review. The response we got back, informal as it was, used the word pattern, and then it used the words wire fraud and financial exploitation. I want to be honest about something. This part was not satisfying. Not yet. Because Joel was still living with it. He was still going to sleep next to someone who had been methodically taking money from him, and he was scared of what she might do if cornered too quickly. We needed to move carefully. We needed the moment where the ground was already prepared before we struck the match. She gave it to us. 3 weeks after the Sunday lunch at my house, Serena sent me an email. Professional, cordial, follow-up on our exciting conversation. She said she and Joel had toured the Hartwell estate and put down a $5,000 inquiry deposit on a date, refundable only within 7 days. She said she wanted to coordinate on next steps before the deadline passed. She attached a payment breakdown. Her family contribution, 0. Joel's contribution, $50,000. My contribution, the remainder. I forwarded it to Carol. Carol forwarded it to his contact, and then, because timing is a kind of mercy, I called an attorney I knew who handled civil matters and started a conversation about documenting the prior financial transfers as a civil claim. Then I called Joel. I said, "It's time." He said, "I'm scared." I said, "I'm scared." I said, "I know, I'll be right there." What happened next I will not dramatize, because it doesn't need it. Joel confronted Serena with the documentation, the texts, the transfers, all of it, and told her the relationship was over. She reacted exactly the way Carol had predicted she would. She threatened, she minimized, she cried, she threatened again. She said the money was gifts. She said Joel had been abusive and she had a friend who would back her up. What she didn't know was that Joel had recorded the conversation, legally, in a one-party consent state. She moved out of his apartment 2 days later. The civil attorney filed the claim the week after that. The DA's office opened a preliminary inquiry, and Serena, it turned out, had done this before. Not to Joel specifically, but the pattern was familiar enough that once the claim was filed and her name went into the system, 2 other complaints surfaced from different counties, different men, different stories with the same financial architecture. The case took several months to work through. I am not going to pretend it was clean or quick, or that Joel walked out of it unscathed. He didn't. He lost some money he'll never get back. He lost months of his life to something that was never real. He had some hard conversations with a therapist that I think, in the long run, opened something in him that needed opening. But here is what I want to say to you, if you're listening. At 63, I have made enough mistakes to fill a library. I have been too trusting and not trusting enough. I have been slow when I should have been fast. But I have learned, through everything, that the quietest move is sometimes the most powerful one. That the right response to someone presenting you with a performance is not to applaud, it is to watch the hands. Serena sat in my kitchen and asked me for nearly $500,000 on the first day we met. She thought she had read me correctly. Older, comfortable, wanting his son to be happy, probably sentimental. She was right about all of it except the last part. I do want my son to be happy, but I've wanted it long enough to know that happiness built on a lie isn't happiness at all. It's just a more expensive kind of pain. Joel is doing well now. He started seeing someone new a few months ago. I've met her once, briefly, and I liked how she talked to him. Like he was a full person, like she wasn't performing. I still rake leaves in October. And sometimes, when the afternoon light comes through the kitchen windows and goes amber the way it did that day, I sit at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and I think about those 4 words written on a folded piece of paper. Dad, she is dangerous. He was right. And I am so glad he trusted me enough to say so. If there's someone in your life you've been afraid to tell the truth to, a parent, a friend, anyone, this is me telling you, write the note. Slip it across the table. Trust that the right people will know what to do with it. Don't forget to subscribe if you found this story meaningful. And in the comments, tell me what time it is where you are right now, and tell me, have you ever had to protect someone you love from something they couldn't see? I've been thinking a lot lately about what it actually means to protect someone. Not the dramatic version, not the raised voice, the confrontation, the fist on the table. I mean the quiet kind. The kind where you sit across from someone who is lying to your face, and you pour yourself more coffee, and you smile, and you file everything away in a place they cannot reach. Joel didn't come to me right away. That's the part I keep returning to. He had been carrying this for months. The car repair money, the investment that disappeared, the Scottsdale emergency that was probably never an emergency at all. And he hadn't said a word. Not because he was weak, because he was ashamed. And shame is a strange thing. It makes people protect the very situation that's hurting them. Because admitting the truth out loud means admitting they didn't see it coming. I understand that. I didn't always. When I was younger, I thought people who got taken advantage of had simply been careless. Now I know better. The people who run the kind of schemes Serena was running, they don't target careless people. They target people with open hearts. People who want to believe the best. People who love. That's what she saw in my son. Not a fool. A good man. What she miscalculated was the father. Here is what I believe about cause and effect. Stripped of anything mystical or religious, the choices we make leave marks. Not always immediately. Not always visibly. But every action has a weight, and that weight goes somewhere. Serena had spent years building a life on extraction, taking from people and moving on before the reckoning arrived. But reckonings don't disappear. They accumulate, and by the time she sat down at my kitchen table and presented me with a payment breakdown that listed her own family's contribution as 0, she had accumulated enough that the whole structure was ready to fall. I didn't knock it over. I just stopped holding it up. That distinction matters to me. There's a kind of justice that requires you to become something hard and punishing. And I don't think that serves anyone, least of all yourself. What I did instead was gather information, move carefully, and trust that the truth, once properly documented and placed in front of the right people, would do the work on its own. It did. Joel is going to be fine, not because this didn't hurt him. It did, more than he's let on, probably more than he knows yet. But because he made the right call at the right moment. 4 words on a folded piece of paper. That took courage. That took more honesty than most people can manage when they're embarrassed and scared and still half hoping they're wrong about someone they love. I think about the person he's becoming through this. Harder in the right places, more careful without being closed off, a little more willing to ask for help, which I think is the most underrated form of intelligence there is. Knowing when you're in over your head and trusting someone to wade in with you. That is not weakness. That is wisdom that takes most people decades to find. If you're listening to this and something in it sounds familiar, if there's a number in your bank account that doesn't add up, a story that keeps changing, a request that arrives right before you've had time to think, I want you to hear this clearly. You are allowed to say nothing and observe everything. You are allowed to take your time. The pressure to decide immediately is always part of the design. Write the note. Slip it across the table. There is someone in your life who will know what to do with it.